Hello, Flagstone.
Oh, hello. Is that Flagstone Properties?
Yes, that's right. Flagstone here. How can I help you?
Hello. I'm ringing just to make inquiries about renting a house. My name's John Anderson.
Yes, Mr. Anderson. What sort of thing were you looking for?
Two-bedroom house with garden.
Well, yes, sir, that shouldn't be any problem. Just to let you know that our the main areas we deal with are the city centre itself.
City centre,
And the north suburbs.
Oh, well, we were most interested in the northern areas, actually.
Right, yes. What sort of price were you thinking of?
Well, could you give me some idea?
Certainly. It really ranges from £250 per month.
Only £250?
Yes, to about £500, depending on a number of different factors.
Oh, what does it depend on?
Well, obviously the quality of the area, and then whether there's a garden.
Oh, well, as I said, we'd want a garden.
And a garage pushes up the price.
Right. Well, we wouldn't necessarily need one. I think about £350 a month would be our limit.
OK. Well, would you like to have a look at a couple of properties, sir?
Yes, that'd be great.
Looking at our files, I think we've got two which might suit you.
Oh, hang on. I'll just get a pen. Right.
OK, well, there's one on West Park Road, which is £325 a month.
Are the bills included?
Well, that one just includes the water bill.
OK, right.
And the second house is in Tithe Road. I'll just spell that for you, OK?
Yep.
Tithe Road.
Yeah, got that. And how much is that one?
That's £380.
380. Is that including water?
No, I'm afraid not, but it does include the telephone rental.
Oh, well, that's not too bad then.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
So when would you be available to see them?
Well, I'll be in town next week, say Thursday.
No, I'm sorry, we don't have any availability for Thursday. How about Wednesday afternoon?
OK. That's fine. Would 5 be OK?
Yes, fine. 5 o'clock it is. Just come to the Flagstone offices.
Oh, before I forget, what sort of things do I need to get done, to rent with you?
Well, the most important thing is a letter from your bank.
No problem.
And then a reference letter from your employer.
Yes, that's OK.
Great. And then we would need you to give 2 weeks' notice of moving in.
Right, 2 weeks' notice. And what about a deposit?
That's 1 month's rent, whatever the amount is.
OK. 1 month. Is that it?
No, sorry, one more. You will have to pay for the contract.
Oh, yes, I'd forgotten about that. OK, fine. So I'll start arranging those, and
I'll see you next week.
Yes. Thanks very much. Bye.
Goodbye.
Now turn to Section 2. Section 2. You'll hear a guide talking to visitors about a tourist attraction. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 14. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 14. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Roman Baths. My name's Amanda, and I'm your guide for today. Before we begin the tour, I'd like to point out that we have child carriers, free of charge, of course, for those of you with young children, and I can see that there are 1 or 2 of you here this morning. It might make things a bit easier for you than using a pushchair. If you don't want to carry your coats and bags around with you, there is a cloakroom behind reception where they'll be quite safe. Also, should anyone want to use the bathroom, there's one here in the reception hall, opposite the ticket office, and another one by the shop where we end our tour, right by the exit. Having mentioned the shop, I should tell you that it's full of interesting things for you to remember your visit by. Posters, postcards, replicas of the Gorgon's head, the Haruspex stone, and the statues that you'll be seeing on your tour. There are also games, books and videos for children and other souvenirs. Our first stop will be the terrace, where you will get your first view of the baths. Now, the statues that line the terrace here are of Roman emperors, governors of Britain and various military leaders. These aren't from Roman times either. In fact, they were sculpted in 1894, especially for the grand opening of the baths in 1897. But what you can see from here is only a fraction of the whole Roman bath site, which stretches below ground level under the surrounding streets and squares of the town. While we're here on the terrace, getting our first look at the baths, let me fill you in on a bit of the history. This site, with its hot springs, has long been seen as a sacred place, and the first people to build here were the Celts, and the shrine they built was dedicated to the goddess Sulis. Of course, back in those days they had no way of explaining how hot water came to be bubbling out of the ground, so they believed it to be the work of the gods. When the Romans came, they too built a temple here and dedicated it to their goddess, Minerva. Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 15 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 15 to 20. The bath you can see from here is called the Great Bath. Not very imaginative, I know, but it is the biggest. Impressive, isn't it? At one time it was housed in a huge vaulted hall 40 metres high, which for many people of the period must have been the largest building they'd ever seen in their lives. The bath itself is 1.6 metres deep, ideal for bathing, and has steps leading down to the water on all sides. The niches or alcoves you can see all around the bath would have had benches and possibly small tables for drinks and snacks. Not a bad way to spend your free time, relax, and tell yourself it's all good for your health. Let's move on to our next stop, the Sacred Spring. This is the heart of the site, where the hot water bubbles up from the ground at a temperature of 46 degrees centigrade. The water comes up from a depth of between roughly 2,500 and 4,500 metres, where geothermal energy raises the water temperature to between 64 degrees and 96 degrees. Over 1 million litres of this hot water rise up here every day, and as well as being hot, the water is rich in minerals, and it was thought it would cure various ailments and illnesses. In fact, people came here from all over the Roman Empire to try out its healing powers. Before we take a look at the changing rooms and saunas, which are known as the East Baths, and the plunge pools and heated rooms of the west part of the bathhouse, we'll pass through the site of the temple and the temple courtyard. Here we are. This temple is one of only 2 known classical Roman temples in Britain. The other is the Temple of Claudius at Colchester. This temple is said to date from the late 1st century AD, being built between 60 and 70 AD. But the original temple has been knocked about and added to over the centuries, and what you can see here are just bits of the original temple. Okay, shall we move on? That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Hello. Jonathan Briggs, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Do come in and sit down.
Thanks.
Right. Well, Jonathan, as we explained in your letter, in this part of the interview, we like to talk through your application form, your experience to date, etc. And then in the second part, you go for a group interview.
Group interview. Yes, I understand.
So, your first degree was in economics.
Yes, but I also did politics as a major strand.
And you graduated in 1989. And I see you've been doing some teaching.
Yes, I worked as a volunteer teacher in West Africa. I was there for almost 3 years in total, from 1990 to 1992.
How interesting. What organisation was that with?
It's not one of the major ones. It's called Teach South.
Oh, right. Yes, I have heard of it. It operates in several African countries, doesn't it? And what kind of school was it?
A rural cooperative.
Oh, a rural cooperative. How interesting. And what did you teach?
A variety of things in different years. I did, with forms 1 to 3, mainly geography, and some English with form 5. Then, in my final year, I took on some agricultural science with the top year. That's form 6.
Right. Quite a variety, then.
I also ran the school farm.
How interesting.
Before the interview continues, you have some time to look at questions 28 to 30. Now listen to the rest of the interview and answer questions 28 to 30.
And how did you find the whole experience?
I'll be honest with you. At the end of the first year, I really wanted to leave and come home.
Oh, why was that?
Well, I was very homesick at first and missed my family.
Oh, yes, I can understand that.
And I also found it frustrating to have so few teaching resources. But I did decide to stay, and in the end I extended my tour to a 3rd year.
Right. Things must have looked up then.
Yes, we set up a very successful project, breeding cattle to sell locally.
Really?
And then, after a lot of hard work, we finally got funds for new farm buildings.
And you wanted to see things through.
Uh-huh.
And that's why you want to train to teach geography.
Yes. I've had a couple of jobs since then, but I now realise I like teaching best. And I chose geography because it's my favourite subject. And also because I think it has so many useful applications.
Well, you certainly have had some interesting work experience. I'll ask you now to go on to the next stage of the interview.
Now turn to Section 4, Section 4. You will hear Rebecca Bramwell, an artist and illustrator, giving advice on how to get your first job or commission as an artist. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 35. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 35.
I'd like to introduce Rebecca Bramwell, an artist and illustrator who's come along today to talk to you all about getting your first job or commission as an artist. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you for inviting me. I remember when I graduated back in 1983, I was very excited about getting my first commission. My degree was in fine art, and I'd worked long and hard to get it. I was an enthusiastic student, and I never found it difficult to find the incentive to paint. I think as a student you're pushed along by fellow students and tutors, and the driving force is there. However, when you leave college, you find yourself saying things like, "I'll have one more cup of coffee and then I'll sit down to work." I hate to admit it, but I say it myself. Suddenly, it isn't finding the inspiration or getting the right paper that's a problem. It's you. In my view, there are a number of reasons why this happens. It's a real challenge making a decent living as a new artist. You have to find a market for your work. Often you work freelance and need to take samples or portfolios of your work from place to place. These experiences are common to a lot of professional people. But artists also have to bare their souls to the world, in a way. More than anything, they want praise. If people don't like what they create, then it can be a very emotional and upsetting experience hearing them say this. I began to realise that these problems were preventing me from having a career in art, and so I decided to experiment. I was a painter, but I started to dabble in illustration, drawing pictures for books, cards, and this offered me the opportunity to become more emotionally detached from my work. I was no longer producing images from the heart, but developing images for a specified subject, taking a more practical approach. I began to develop a collection of my illustrations, which I put into a portfolio and started to carry around with me to show prospective clients and employers. But it was still tricky because publishers, for example, want to know that your drawings will reproduce well in a book. But without having had any work published, it's hard to prove this. Having a wonderful portfolio or a collection of original artwork is, of course, a first step. But what most potential clients would like to see is printed artwork, and without this evidence, they tend to hold back still when it comes to offering a contract.
Look at questions 36 to 40. Now answer questions 36 to 40.
Well, I overcame this problem in two ways. And I suppose this is my advice to you on preparing your portfolio of your best work. The first way was by submitting my work for a competition. And the one I chose was for a horoscope design and was sponsored by a top women's magazine. There are a few of these competitions each year, and they offer new illustrators an opportunity to showcase their work. The other approach I took was to design and print some mock-up pages of a book. In other words, I placed some of my illustrations next to some text in order to demonstrate how my work would look when it was printed. Perhaps I was lucky in that I had taken a degree that provided me with all-round creative skills so that I could vary my style and wasn't limited to a certain technique. Now, I think that is important. The art world and many other creative fields do try to pigeonhole people into snug boxes with an accompanying label. Now, I think you should try to resist this if you feel it happening to you. If you don't, You'll find it difficult to have new work accepted if you try to develop your style at a later stage in your career. Nevertheless, when you start out, and particularly when you're going for an interview, it's important not to confuse people by having a lot of different examples in your portfolio. One remedy for this is to separate your work into distinct categories. In my case, I did this by dividing my design-inspired illustrations from my paintings. It's then easier to analyse the market suited to each portfolio, such as magazines, book jackets, CD covers, etc. Working under two names is also useful, as it clarifies the different approaches and offers a distinction between them. I think it's been hard for artists to be recognised in anything other than the pigeonholes that they've been placed in. But luckily, these barriers are slowly being demolished. So I really do wish you all the very...
That is the end of section 4.